It seems to be all about the bottom line in the video gaming industry, like most businesses actually. Instead of letting a video game franchise bow out gracefully into the annals of history, game developers see it fit to milk what they see as a cash cow to the point where they'll extract every penny and let it die a horrible limping death. With modern gaming technology, game developers are seeing new ways to bring back former blockbuster games. Is it because they've run out of ideas? Or could their reasoning be to simply bring the game to a new generation of gamers? We give our opinions on the trend of reboots, remakes, reimaginings, and repaintings, right here on Downloadable Content. Welcome one and all to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, still Brian, always will be Brian, and we are joined by Nick.
Hello.
Kat.
Hello.
Ron.
Hello.
Ronnie.
Hey.
And the internet will explode.
Oral Ford.
Yes, because Strongbad is going to come onto my computer and go, "404 Ford!"
I think that our viewers are smart enough to tell the difference between the two Rons.
Yes, one of us is educated and intelligent. One's just a dumb idiot. I'll let the listener decide.
Well, apparently, Ronnie already said we have viewers. I don't know how you can view an audio program, but
Listeners.
There you go. Proper terminology. Who needs it?
Jeez.
I don't know. The official iTunes podcast directory calls them viewers.
Well, that's because...
Touche!
Well, there you go. You've proved your point. Steve Jobs is so arrogant, he won't admit to being wrong. So...
There we go. Let us continue.
Let us press on. In this episode, we're going to be talking about reboots, remakes, reimaginings, repaintings,
Gesundheit.
Yeah, basically. Which seems to be, I seem to notice it more and more with this particular generation of consoles than any other previously. And... most of the times I'm seeing reboots, remakes, and I just have to, collectively groan. Because I see, we're putting out we're just making Resident Evil 4 in HD, and I'm just like, really? Really? You're not making any changes to the story or to the gameplay, you're just making it shiny? Really?
Not even additional content.
Well, that only matters to the people who played it the first time. A lot of us are old enough to have been playing these games when they were originally released. But I mean, with a lot of these games, there's at least 5 years since the original. That's long enough to get a new base of people to play the game.
Yep.
We're talking about, for a lot of these, classic games that did very, very well to begin with on consoles that are no longer available. So it's not like even if the kids wanted to, they'd have a chance to play them.
That is true. That is one way of looking at it. Does the fact that, these game developers, they saw they had a really good game a generation or two ago, and now they're bringing it to a new generation of gamers. That's definitely one perspective of looking at it. Others may see it, people who already played the original games and just think, great, you're just milking a dead horse. Which would be an accomplishment if you could milk a dead horse. But
just the image. Great, Brian. I'm going to have to purge that one with fire later.
Speaking of using the correct terminology, your host
I'm
makes
pretty sure
flub.
I'm pretty sure there's some laws against necromancy and milking something that's dead.
Well, that and I don't think you don't normally milk horses.
Exactly. I crossed up my livestock there. So.
And that's why you live in the city.
I don't consider Albany as a city more as just a collection of hot political gas.
I think one thing we should do before we continue on into the rest of this podcast, is, especially from you, Brian, since you're the host on this, is defining what you mean by reboots, remakes, repaintings. To use an example, would you consider the Final Fantasy games, as each one is completely unrelated to the next, to be reboots every time? Or the Street Fighter series back in the 90s, where there was about 18 versions of the same game with one character added or one character taken away?
That's a very, very good point. So I will let you know what I perceive as these definitions here. I consider a remake to be exactly that. A game in which there's really not a whole lot of difference between the new game and the original. I'll give you an example. Chrono Trigger.
Okay.
In which you had the original game for the Super Nintendo, and then it was remade for the PS1. The only thing that was different about it were they inserted anime cutscenes. And they added endings.
What about the Resident Evil 1 remake, which they call a remake, but it's a complete redo of the game for the most part? Would that qualify under remakes? Because you said very few changes.
That is a game that I would consider not entirely a remake, because for me there was enough of a difference in the original game and the new game for it to be almost a standalone game. For me personally, I saw enough difference. There were changes to the story, changes to the layout, and
because what you seem to be talking about is like direct ports. That's
yes.
Ports with minor changes.
Right.
To me, a remake is like the Resident Evil remake.
Okay.
That's a remake to me.
Well, maybe that would be almost like a re-imaging for the Final Fantasy, Resident Evil one. If there's a lot of new content and it's kind of a retelling of the first story, then that's not really a remake, but perhaps maybe it's just
that could almost head toward reboot category, but
not quite though.
It sounds like to me the difference between like the original Resident Evil and the new one, and the new like the remake that they did. Like the first one, it sounds like that there were a lot of like spelling and grammar issues, which I'm pretty sure people will rattle off the names of. And that there were some different plot holes missing that never really got addressed. And in the remake, it sounds like that they addressed those issues. They fixed the spelling, they fixed the grammar, they got rid of some of those plot holes and maybe added some new ones as well. To me, I would see that as a reimagining, because it's going over something that we already know. The ending doesn't change. The ending is you succeed in killing Nemesis or with a rocket launcher or something like that. But how you get to that same ending is a bit different. And to me, I see it as a reimagining.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Fine there. And repaintings are simply that.
Yeah, new graphics.
New graphics, that's it.
So that reboot is probably just a retelling of the story. Starting all over again, a la Castlevania Lords of Shadow.
Or upcoming Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
So things like that.
Twisted Metal.
Yep.
So, now that I think we've got our definitions in, I'm going to start by talking about games in former generations. Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, things like that. Growing up, I didn't really see a whole lot of any of this, really. I mean, there were a few exceptions. For example, I'm going to throw out Super Mario All-Stars, which was a compilation released for the Super Nintendo. Was a compilation of Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, 3, and we also got Lost Levels in the States for the first time. So...
the true Mario 2.
Yes. Yes, very true.
I hate that game.
Yeah, there was a reason why Cat Lost Levels didn't make it over here originally.
The evil mushroom that doesn't look like an evil mushroom if you play the Japanese version. That's a good reason right there.
Oh look, mushroom!
Slightly off color.
You're like, hey, mushroom, great, and wait a minute, I shrunk?
Wait a minute, why is this mushroom purple?
Well, it wasn't purple in the Japanese one. That was the problem. It was slightly off color.
Which doesn't help if you're colorblind, but...
Yep.
But anyway, with Super Mario All-Stars, I mean, for Super Mario 1, 2, and 3, they got basically a graphical update. You know, they updated them for Super Nintendo. They added a save function, which was primarily why I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at age 5, I couldn't beat the original Mario by myself in one shot.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could.
Nick probably did. Nick probably did.
I did too, but it took a very, very long chunk of my childhood.
That's
Probably
okay,
the most-
Ronnie. We already figured your childhood was dominated by video games and RPGs.
To me, I got into the end of the original Mario 3, and I'm talking the end. I'm beating Bowser, I'm pounding him in the face, and the NES freezes on me.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh, that's your fail horn moment right there.
Exactly.
That's
And
like
I'm just
the
like,
NES
oh my
screw
God.
foot and kicked you in the nuts. Hard.
Yeah. And, I imagine like Bowser's like, I can't beat this Mario guy. I have to use my last secret recipe. Freeze the NES!
Bowser
And there
used
was a-
hacks.
And
It's
it was
super
the
effective.
save function. And I was just like, oh my God, I just wasted 5 hours of my 5-year-old life playing this goddamn game. And I was about to win too. And then the damn thing freezes. Rage!
And yeah. But I mean, there weren't a whole lot of remakes and things like that in the classic era of video games, probably because of just the sheer amount of work involved to get, make a cartridge in the first place.
That's indeed correct. And we don't really see any reboots during this time period for two reasons to me. One, a lot of the games didn't have enough story for a reboot to really matter. And two, almost every sequel for all but 3 or 4 franchises were basically reboots. They had nothing to do with the previous game other than a consistent hero and villain. And maybe not even a consistent villain.
Yeah, again, a lot of work involved, and that's true. That's true. Also, I mean, games were still very, very new. I mean, in terms of history, you didn't have a whole lot of backlog yet at that point.
And at that point, you could still have a small crew of people or one person program an entire game themselves. And that made it, much easier for them to churn out new games rather than, have to bring back old ones.
Very, very true. The first I ever really noticed of, sort of a cheap remake was the Street Fighter series.
Don't forget their brother, the Mortal Kombat series, which was right alongside them.
Yep.
That didn't do as many remakes, but it got ported to every system that they had.
Right. I mean, these games. I mean, Mortal Kombat, in particular, started life in the arcade.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided, well, how do we make this accessible to as many people as possible? We'll just make it for every single console that happens to be out at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, Street Fighter, I seem to remember very, very clearly there you had, like, Street Fighter 2 was my introduction to the series. And, like, Street Fighter 2, and then there was Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Super Street Fighter. I think Ultimate Street Fighter 2.
By the way, here, this I actually just looked this up because I was curious. Here is the list of ports for the Mortal Kombat 2 game.
Go ahead.
The Sega Mega Drive, the SNES, the Game Boy, the Game Gear, and the Sega Master System, the Amiga, the Sega 32X, PC, DOS, the Sega Saturn, the PlayStation, and then as we continue on, compilations in the PS2 era, download PS2 and Xbox, PlayStation Portable, PS3, and the 2011 Arcade Collection.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just. I mean, at least the only thing I could say to that is at least Midway and Acclaim didn't bother renaming Mortal Kombat 2 with each successive make. It wasn't, you know, Mortal Kombat 2 Turbo, Mortal Kombat 2 Hyper Fighting, Mortal Kombat 2 Fuck Your Mother Edition.
Well, if anyone would have a Fuck Your Mother edition, it would be Mortal Kombat.
Well, they couldn't do that. They couldn't do that until the Wii, when you could have, you know, the Mii that looks like your mother in the game.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Mortal Kombat Super Saiyan Overdrive Limit Break Edition. You know, at least they didn't do what Street Fighter did, and I was just like, and I think the only things really different about the Street Fighter 2 line of games were an additional character or two,
and possibly some tweaks for game balance.
Yeah, more likely the Street Fighter series.
Combos.
Thank you, Kat.
Combos is maybe the only big change that they made throughout it. Was combos were originally an error in the original Street Fighter 2 that they didn't think anyone would ever be able to exploit because they were too difficult. Then when everyone in the tournament scene started using them and it made it a big thing, they made it a game feature and made the game keep track of them. Little known fact.
Ronnie's full of those.
Yeah, pretty much.
Meanwhile, Ronnie's being all academic about this. Kat's just going, more boobs.
No, I meant that's what they would probably add, be more verbs, more fan service, because you see it a lot in those kind of games. It's like, how can we add more fan service and get more people to buy this game and add more boobs?
Cammy, actually.
See, my point is proven.
Yeah, but that was more for the legs.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat did a lot of the boobs, but
yes, they
not
did.
Not so much Street Fighter. I mean, they did have attractive female characters, but mostly it was the big, hard, muscly guys.
Right, and Soul Calibur just added more boobs and more lycra, but
and less clothing. But that's besides the point.
So
okay, this is definitely tangential.
It happens. But yeah, I mean, as we've discussed, remakes, reboots, things like that weren't really all that prevalent on the older consoles. I really started to notice an uptick in these sorts of things for the PlayStation.
Damn you, Square!
When PlayStation was released, Final Fantasy for starters. Although for me, it meant, hey, I can now get into the series. But which was going to prove Ronnie's earlier point of, how do we draw more gamers in?
Well, part of the reason we didn't really see much in the NES, SNES era, not just from what we said before, but they were far too close together. I mean, you're not going to make a remake or a reboot of a game that came out 2 years ago. Maybe even 5 years ago, and it's got to be a big game to make it worthwhile. Everybody still had an NES. Everybody still had a Super Nintendo. Or Genesis if you go that way. If you swing that way.
Yeah. And with the release of the PlayStation, it brought in this entire new generation of gamers that now that everyone saw this brand new, developers saw the brand new market, why not bring back some of their old classics that sold really well?
Not to mention, too, the relatively cheapness of manufacturing all those PlayStation games. It's a lot cheaper to print out 10,000 CDs than it's roll out 10,000 cartridges.
Oh, yeah.
Very true.
Yep.
So, as I said, Final Fantasy now was, the first 6 games, except for 3, which wouldn't see the light of day in the US until the DS, but...
I wonder why 3 never made it here at first.
You'll have to ask Square. They'll probably give you some long, convoluted reason, but...
Fair enough.
But no, I mean...
Sorry.
Final Fantasy 1 and 2 were re-released as Final Fantasy Origins.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Mostly
then
repainting, I would say.
Which then confused the hell out of gamers who had played them when they were originally released in the US, because 2 is 4, and 4 is 2, and 3 is 6, and...
Mm-hmm.
And 5 and 3 don't exist.
Yeah.
I remember arguing that with Ronnie. I was like, I don't understand.
Yes.
I think that's because Ronnie just lived to confuse the hell out of you.
Pretty much.
I'm a font of knowledge, and people just don't understand me.
Keep telling yourself that, buddy.
Final Fantasy V was finally got released over in the United States on the PlayStation. 6 was re-released. But yeah, I mean, how expensive was it to take all of these cartridges and figure out a way to burn them to disk?
Well, considering how easy it was for us to take them and put them on our computers and play them with emulators, I don't think it was that hard for them to take them off the cartridge.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So they just we'll just roll out 100,000 of these and ship it and make some easy money.
And don't forget, they sat down poorly made CGI as well.
Well, you also have to keep in mind, I mean, a lot of the companies back then, when PlayStation first coming out, they weren't multi-million dollar companies like they are now.
That's
they
true.
need what money they could. Like, if they didn't do a lot of these re-releases, they may not have had the money to do some of the games that we remember them for now. You know, it's like a company's job is they need to make money. But that doesn't mean there's always artistic integrity, there's always things like that, especially with a lot of games. But taking an old game, bringing it back, re-releasing it where it costs them almost no money, that lets it get in front of new people. It doesn't really hurt them at all. In fact, it's just getting something that they've done before in front of a bigger audience, a new audience, and they can use that money to fund new games.
And that, case in point, because I really didn't get into the Final Fantasy series until PlayStation. I'd never played the original 1 through 6s.
Blasphemy.
And yeah, I know. I mean, I jumped into the series at 7 and decided to go back. So that was true. I ended up buying all of the re-releases for the PlayStation because for me it was my first experience with these games.
And that really shows, how the remakes would be a good thing is because, you're part of that new generation of gamers coming in. Well, sort of.
Well, yeah, and also the original Final Fantasy, for example, next year will have been out for 25 years.
Yep.
So
big podcast then, I assume.
Oh yes, that might be
and it's
2.
been on how many different systems? NES, PlayStation, Game
Super
Boy,
Nintendo, Game Boy. Oh god, the
Wii.
list goes on.
Wonder Swan.
What?
You said Wonder Swan and everyone went running.
Yeah, let's get away from that. Yeah, that abortion of a console.
I mean,
Yep.
Ronnie, as you mentioned, they weren't going to do remakes for games that were just released a couple of years ago. For example, as I said, Final Fantasy 1, it was originally released on the NES in December of 1987. It then got re-released for the PlayStation, which was when I got it, in April of 2003. So, you're talking almost 16 years after it was originally released that it was remade. And generations of consoles had come and gone by that point. So...
When did the Final Fantasy IV made it to the PlayStation, because the first one of that came out, what, 91? So that's a good long time, too. We're talking good 10 years.
12 years, probably, because the Final Fantasy remakes came out pretty wham-bam pretty fast.
Yeah, they did. It was Final Fantasy IV, Nick, was released on the Super Nintendo in the States November 1991, and then it hit the PlayStation in June of 2001. So 10 years. Almost 10 years.
Yeah, precisely.
You know, that even 10 years is probably a good enough time.
One thing about the things we're talking about, I think one thing we should note is most of these remakes sold very well. Like,
yes, they did.
There's a reason that they do these, and that's, you know, as we've mentioned multiple times, it brings in new gamers, but also, especially, and I'll say this from me, I've bought many old games that I owned on my Wii, downloading them off the store, just because I don't have the cartridge anymore, or, you know, I don't keep my Super Nintendo or regular Nintendo hooked up anymore.
Or like me, and you have two Super Nintendos and neither of them work for one reason or another.
Oh.
Exactly.
Gaming nirvana, and you can't do a damn thing. Oh, well. I don't know, Kat, did you get caught up in the Final Fantasy remake craze of the PlayStation era?
I did not, mostly because I was spending way too much of my life playing Final Fantasy VIII.
Yes.
And I do mean way too much of my life. Don't even go there. We can have a long discussion about this. That's basically what I was doing. I enjoyed 7. I enjoyed 9. The last one I played for any PlayStation was 10 and 10-2, and I did not approve.
But yes, so it wasn't until PlayStation that really I started noticing remakes and things like that. I mentioned Chrono Trigger earlier, which again, that was my introduction to Chrono Trigger. I never played it for the Super Nintendo. Hadn't even heard of it, actually, for the Super Nintendo. Yeah, I know, you can beat me up as you will.
That's fine.
I'll save that until after the podcast.
Okay. You're going to drive all the way from Cape Cod, make the 4-hour drive, and beat me senseless. Okay.
I can't think of a better reason to make that trip.
I love you too, you prick. The last thing I want to discuss before we cut to break is the handheld market. Because, you know, while all this was going on, there were still remakes being done on the handheld as well, Game Boy Advanced.
They never stopped.
Yeah.
Even as far back as, you know, the original Game Boy, they had remakes. One of the first games on it was Tetris.
Exactly. So,
well, wouldn't that just be a straight-up port, though?
Brian was arguing that you know, remakes were ports. Because I'd call the Chrono Trigger, I'd call a lot of the things they call remakes are actually ports. Remakes, as I mentioned earlier, to me, are like the Resident Evil one, where there is it's not a remake unless there's a significant change to the game. That's just me.
Well, let's think about it this way. When did Tetris for the NES come out and Tetris came out for the Game Boy? Because in my vision, remake is the same game years later, but a port is 2 games released very close apart.
I believe 86 was Tetris for the NES, and I know Tetris for the Game Boy didn't come out until long after that because there wasn't even a Game Boy back then.
Okay, then yes, then that would be a remake.
This might be me misremembering, because I'm pretty sure the Tetris came out shortly after the Game Boy itself came out.
The Tetris for the NES came out in 86. It came out in 89 for the Game Boy, so it was one of the Game Boy's launch titles, pretty much.
Yes, it was.
Then yeah, fair enough. Then that would be classified as a remake.
So whatever the case, I remember there was a line of NES games that were redone for the Game Boy Advance. It was a classic NES series.
Yeah, that was just straight up remakes, and then they had a reboot or two. Reboot. One of them that I can remember I'm playing right now, Metroid Zero Mission.
Since I'm not all that familiar with Metro, what is that a remake?
That is a remake of the NES Metroid. It got a graphical upgrade, it added some more powers, and an additional mission after you beat the original game. So maybe that's more of a re-imaging, but it's kind of a little bit of the both. But I'm enjoying it so far.
Alright. Fair enough. But yes, I remember I also have the Phantasy Star collection. There was 1 through 3 that was released on the Game Boy Advance.
Yep, I have that as well, and it's a very good series of games. It gave some people a chance to get introduced to Phantasy Star that never would have, because it really never hit it as big as a lot of the old Dragon Quest Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and Phantasy Star, wasn't that a Genesis exclusive, pretty much?
Yes, it was.
So,
It was this Genesis Final Fantasy. That's the way I always saw it, but it never made this big.
Right, and if you were on the Nintendo side of the Nintendo-Sega wars of the 90s, then,
Yeah, that's why I've never played Phantasy Star and probably should.
Great games, especially the 3rd and the 4th.
3rd and the 4th? Well, I'll probably go in order, but still.
So, there we go. Some good discussion going on at this point. In our second half, we will then delve into where the remakes, reboots, etc. really go into high gear with this, in particular, this current generation of consoles. Things like Silent Hill, Tomb Raider, Devil May Cry, and all of that fun stuff. Give you our thoughts on that. That will be done on the not-so-remade second half of downloadable content. We'll be back. Welcome back to this second half of downloadable content, talking about reboots, remakes, reimaginings, re-everything. All here, all still here. We haven't gone off to be remade elsewhere. So now we're going to shift the discussion into the current generation of consoles. We spent the first half talking about remakes or the lack thereof in earlier generations, with a few notable exceptions. But I think it is in this current generation of consoles where this notion of reboots and reimaginings and et cetera, really just go crazy. Especially,
you say that like it's a bad thing.
I do.
Well, we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. That's my opening salvo. Because apparently everyone is now getting HD crazy. I'll start off with a fairly, a trend that's getting more and more prevalent, at least as I hear more and more about it, is the concept of what I call repainting, in which a game is getting done for another system, but has no additional new features in it except better graphics.
It's shiny!
Well, to me, that kind of seems like a reboot, not a reboot, a port, but to try to draw in people that might still own the game and the console that came from, especially since we have consoles now that are backwards compatible. They make it shinier because it requires very little work on their part, and it can hopefully draw in some of the people who owned the original game.
That's true.
It's true, but I mean, I still have the sense. I mean, I still own a PS2, and I have a Wii which can play GameCube games. So I'll give you some examples of this repainting. Recently announced, we have the Resident Evil HD Collection and the Silent Hill HD Collection. I'll start with those two. What Capcom is doing for Resident Evil is basically they're taking Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4 and just slapping a coat of HD graphics on them. For me, I consider this just a bad move because, Resident Evil 4 has already been ported over and remade for everything, it seems.
But it's such a well-loved game. I mean, people have... I don't even like Resident Evil 4, and I've heard people clamoring that they want an HD version, that they wanted it since it came out.
Why, though? There's no changes to the story. If
you have an HD TV and you're playing a game that is not HD, it doesn't look that good. It really doesn't. I can say this from my big TV. If you have a game that's not HD1, I enjoy them anyways because I don't really care that much about graphics. But it is really noticeable compared to seeing Resident Evil 5 on my TV as opposed to my brother's, which is a regular TV. It looked far better on his. When it's blown up too large and it's not designed for HD, you're not going to have the same experience. It's not going to look as good.
I'll give you that, but it's... yeah. I cannot wrap my head around it, because if you've already played this game a bunch of times on, I mean, and the game isn't that old to begin with.
Code Veronica is, though.
It could. You could.
To me, it's more they did a remake of Code Veronica because they wanted to get it out in front of the people who wanted it. But Code Veronica never sold well enough, even on its own. By combining it with Resident Evil 4, they're able to get Code Veronica seen by people who would never have bought it otherwise because they want the Resident Evil 4.
I mean, I've already played Resident. I mean, I own Resident Evil 4, and I have systems that can play it. And the fact that I'm not going to buy the game just because it's just getting a new coat of shiny.
Keep in mind too, for some of these, this may be a case of they're very cheap to put out, these remakes or these reboots or these repaints. Because how much honestly, for people who aren't really sure, how much do you think Microsoft is spending on the anniversary edition of Halo with the updated graphics?
Not much.
Exactly.
Again, they're just they're re-rendering everything. It's a very cheap. What am I trying to say here? Really cheap process.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, like I don't know, this is just my personal opinion, but I imagine people are doing all these reboots and remakes because they don't want to risk a new IP. They don't want to risk a new product because they don't want to spend millions of dollars and years of development on
But
a
there
product
are.
that could fail. Like, for example, Mirror's Edge.
All these companies are putting out new ones, though, but a lot of them aren't catching on. These reboots and remakes are selling very well, and they're the funding for the.
Me.
And
it does.
Well, why? Why though? If it does, if you're not buying it, then you're not the target audience. The target audience is a lot of people who don't have the original game anymore, never played the original game, but heard how good it was, don't have the old system anymore and want it for their new system. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, Code Veronica. Code Veronica came out in 2001. It had a remake on GameCube in 2003.
Yep.
So that's 10,
Code Veronica
8 years ago?
That Code Veronica, GameCube or PS2?
GameCube. GameCube, PS2 was 2001.
Because Code Veronica was originally...
2000 on Dreamcast, yeah, you're right.
Came out on Dreamcast first, and then it was, because of the abysmal sales on the Dreamcast, they decided to...
port it to PlayStation 2.
And, you know, I mean, I guess you're right, Ronnie. I mean, I'm not the target audience because I still own the game, and I still have the systems that can play the game.
Just think about it this way. You want another game that you could play and enjoy, which for you means a sequel or a new IP, a new game that's out there. They're still putting these things out because the remakes cost very little money, but the remakes are bringing more people, especially for Resident Evil, bringing people who may not have played the earlier games in the franchise. Every reboot and remake in Resident Evil has the potential to bring in people to the franchise that are going to buy the new games, the new sequels, whatever else they're doing.
And then you have the people who are going to buy 8 copies of the same game. So...
Yeah, I was just about to get to that, Brian. The whole thing seems lazy. It's almost kind of looking at the Madden franchise, where all they pretty much do every year is throw out a roster update and charge you $60 for it. And there are people who do this, religiously every year. And I imagine these repaintings to be the exact same thing. It's just minor updates that people are more than happy to part with the $40-$50.
Well, the Madden franchise, I'll say, the Madden franchise, that whole concept just offends me. There's no reason that those couldn't be done as patches and just do a new version every 3 or 4 years when you have something worthwhile to put in the game.
Again, but if they can get away with it every single year,
but I mean, these games haven't been done in, a lot of them haven't been done in 5, 7, 10 years since the last one was out. 10 years. 10-year-olds play video games. There are kids who weren't born when the game was out last who are now old enough to play. 4 years is old enough to get new people. 5, 7 years, that's enough to get a different generation to play the game that wouldn't have. Even if the system's still around, like with the PS2, PS3. I mean, kids today are using the PS3. The people our age may still have PS2s, but the new people, they're not going to be going to the PS2. They're going to be playing the PS3 games. So if we can get that in front of them.
But then let's get into this then. Most of our gaming population, a good 3/4, is over the age of 18. 5 years ago, we would all remember Resident Evil 4 on whatever previous version there is. Is really the cost of making this and making the discs and going through the effort of throwing on a new coat of paint, is it really worth it to possibly attract another quarter of the gamers? Is that extra couple thousand really worth it?
They're making lots of money off of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like it's just a whole bunch of people who just want to go, ooh, shiny, and write the word soccer on your forehead.
I think the easiest way for us to put this, and I think it's the main difference between the way I view this and the way you guys seem to, is, as far as I can see, there has not been a significant lowering of sequels and original games that are coming out because of these remakes. They're not replacing games that would have been made beforehand. These cost very little money from their make. They're making them in addition to what they were already going to be doing. If they weren't going to do the Resident Evil 4 Code Veronica game, do you really think they were going to be releasing another game to replace that? No, this was just something extra they were doing. It would make them a little bit of extra money, it cost them very little, and it has almost no risk for them to do.
But then you have the issue where, like, say for example, Square Enix, they've put out how many remakes since 2000? How many new games have they put out? 5? If we're
yeah,
lucky?
But they did the same thing back. Back during the Super Nintendo days, they brought a lot of stuff out, and that, to me, is the golden era of RPGs with a lot of the stuff they've done. But I don't think it's the remakes that made them slow down. It's moving to the PlayStation. Just look at Final Fantasy 7 or 8 as compared to 6 or 4. It requires a lot more time, a lot more development time to make a game like that. And they, at least originally, Square didn't have huge teams of people doing this. They didn't have multiple teams. Now they do, and they're doing several other things as well. But I mean, back then, they just took the development they needed for the games, and they used these remakes, which, as we all know, we keep harping on how little money it takes for them to do it, and how little time it takes for them to do it.
But then we're going back into the differences of years. When Square did it, for some of the games, it's been 10 years. But for games like Resident Evil 4 and Code
Veronica, 7 years. 7 years.
Okay, Code Veronica is a little different, but I'm gonna get to Resident Evil 4. When it just keeps getting done and done and done again every 3 to 5 years, it just seems like there's no. It almost feels lazy.
I mean, think of it this way: you're buying Resident Evil Code Veronica, a game that hasn't been around for 7 years, and then as a bonus, they give you Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them trying to, fluff that up because of the Code Veronica sales or lack thereof. But I mean, I have to tend to side with Nick because Resident Evil 4, at least for this collection, Resident Evil 4 has been released on GameCube, PS2, Wii. So.
Oh, I don't disagree with Resident Evil 4. It's just that when you brought up the Resident Evil 4 Code Veronica, I had to argue the Code Veronica side. It hasn't been seen in 7 years. It's been over 10 years since the original release. I mean, as far as I see it, Resident Evil 4, the HD version, is just a bonus to try to make the Code Veronica remake, sell.
And
it didn't.
And what's going to probably happen is that they're going to charge full price, and the cash cow will continue. So,
moving away from Resident Evil 4, what about some other remakes or reboots that we've seen, like, something that's coming up really soon, the Ico was it? Ico?
Team Ico, yeah.
Team Ico collection. It's going to be a repainting of Ico and Shadow of the Colossus.
And that would probably be something a little different, mostly because both of them were kind of cult hits as opposed to mass media hits. So this is something, especially with the third game coming out, which I can't remember it for the life of me.
Last Guardian.
Thanks.
Last Guardian.
And, it kind of, I would say, would help, the whole thing group together.
Mm.
I mean, I never played any of these games, but I I remember Shadow of the Colossus seeming to be very well received.
It did very well. Yeah, it did very well critically. It did very well critically, but neither Colossus or Ico ever really hit it big.
Very true.
Again, that's why they were cult hits. They were good. I've never played them personally, but I've heard that nothing but good things, but it just never caught on.
Let's see. The Metal Gear Solid is also getting another coat of paint. They're going to be doing a Metal Gear HD collection. That's a repainting of Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and a PSP game called Peace Walker.
Well, here's
that one makes more sense, though.
How so?
Well, Metal Gear Solid, a lot of people, from what I've talked to Metal Gear Solid fans, they started to really get into it in Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes and 3. and before moving on to 4. A lot of people I've talked to really haven't played Metal Gear Solid 2 unless you were, with it since the beginning. So the repainting of 2 and with 3 and adding Peace Walker, which I will tell you a lot of people probably have not played because it's a PSP game, and I don't know about other people's areas, but where I'm from, no one owns a PSP. So this should be a nice add-on for people who want to play second, replay the third again, and play something new.
I kind of saw that for the reboots of the Resident Evil franchise. Of lots of people came in because of 4 and 5 that never played the original games, of the original games.
And going back to what you said about the Code of Veronica, I understand that. It just seems like 4 has just been done to death, and 3 has been done to death, and I grant that.
Resident Evil 4 is the Ocarina of Time for Capcom. It will be ported everywhere they can, at any chance they can, used as a bonus in anything can, because people love it, and people will buy it. It's that simple. And I don't disagree with you on that.
That is an excellent analogy, and I'm glad you brought up Ocarina of Time, because that has been ported and redone and remade and repainted to death.
Very true. Kat, you have been awfully quiet.
I don't have much to offer. I basically see it as it's being done. It's not going to stop being done. And no matter, the consumer really has the bottom line. As long as someone's willing to pay for it, they're going to keep doing it.
That's very true. I mean, some of these
It's
remakes...
it's like with the thing with Walmart. If you don't like them, don't spend the money there.
Basically, yeah.
A lot of people will complain about it, but they're still going to spend the money when their old favorite Super Nintendo or PlayStation game comes out again, and they want it on their mobile device, or they want it on their Wii, so they don't have to hold the old console. They're going to spend the money while they're complaining that, they'd rather have a new game. Now, I'm not talking about you guys. I'm just talking in general, because this isn't the first time I've heard this.
Yeah, what it seems to me is that people want to have their memories be just that, memories of the older times of the Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis eras, and yet when these ports or remakes or reboots head on to our more modern consoles, people complain because it's ruining what they remember, but they're still gonna get it anyway because it's a game they remember.
Exactly. Have your cake and eat it too.
To go into one that I've actually been waiting to hear about. How about what do you guys think about the Tomb Raider remake?
Yes, we were just about to segue, and we were discussing repaintings. Now we're going to get games that are actually being redone from the ground up. Reboots.
That's a series that really kind of it had its stride early on, and then it just kind of fizzled over the years. And I'm really hoping this reboot. I have high hopes for it. I really hope this reboot is going to bring some new life and some magic back into the series. Kind of bring it down to its roots, why we liked it in the first place.
Yeah,
This is one of those rare reboots that really makes it worthwhile because of what you said. The recent games have just gone in the crapper, and everyone thought just kill the series. But now we've seen the previews, we've seen the trailers, and everyone's getting really pumped up over this, and I just kind of hope that it doesn't go the way of Duke Nukem.
Well, I think part of the reason why people are looking forward to it is because we see Tomb Raider when it first came out, and we see Lara Croft, and after we stop googling at her breast for 5 hours, you look at her and we see her as a very cynical, very wizened woman who appears to have had several adventures before this, and she's very jaded and just all sort of blasé, like, oh, yet not another island with dinosaurs on it. But now we get to see that it appears in this reboot, we're going to her right as she's 21, and she's this wide-eyed teen, and she's getting thrown to this this weird island, and now she's got to kind of fight her way out of it, and she's very naive and very innocent, and she's got to, I guess, lose that innocence in a sense, and it's very refreshing to see this character that we know is very jaded and very cynical, and we see her in her past when she wasn't, and she still is this innocent person.
Yeah, the focus on the reboot is more story and character development as opposed to eye candy, which is, from my perspective, that's good to know that the focus isn't just on movies.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to play Tomb Raider, some people want to play it for that, but most of them want to play it for the story.
Yeah, I mean, the whole, oh look, she has a rack, worked back when it first came out, but
not anymore.
Not in our day and age of gaming.
No,
well, I mean, the other thing with the Resident Evil is one of the things that really, at least for me, attracted people was it was really just a fun game to play. I mean, yes, the story was good. Yes, the boobs definitely helped for some people. But, I mean, when you really get down to it, I mean, it was just fun. It worked.
And I'm hoping Tomb Raider, does very well, because then it actually might get me into the series. It was a series I kind of avoided during the PlayStation era.
Yeah, I can relate to that, especially with the reboot of Castlevania, Lords of Shadow. Deciding to tell that from the beginning again, and I played that, enjoyed it, and now I'm getting into the whole Castlevania series.
Great series to be getting into, and do you recommend that game? Because I haven't played it yet.
Do you like a God of War style Castlevania?
Sounds good.
Alright, go get it. It is pretty darn good, but you're gonna see it plays a lot like God of War.
Then another series that's getting a reboot, Devil May Cry.
This is the first I've heard about it, to be honest.
Lame gag.
Alright, hold on. We have some gagging and moaning from the peanut gallery. Ron,
how many people hate this game?
Ron, let's start with you.
For me, I think Devil May Cry should be left as it is. I mean, we already know Dante's a badass. We don't need to see how he becomes a badass. They addressed that in Devil May Cry 3, where he goes and fights his brother in that big tower, and Devil May Cry 4 was like the in-between between Devil May Cry 1 and 2. And we already see Devil May Cry 2 where Dante gets to ride off into hell to kill a whole bunch of demons. And that looks to be like why don't you do a game based on that when he's in hell and he's got to fight his way through to the devil or whatever to stop the demon incursion on the earth. We don't need to see a reboot of Devil May Cry with him in this like emo goth hair and eyeliner, getting the crap kicked out of him by everyone and anyone around him, and then just it
looks like Capcom took a page out of the Twilight books and went, "Hey, let's do this."
And an
pale
eerie
white
silence
skin,
befalls the
jet black hair. He's very gaunt, very thin, and I swear he's like got like eyeliner on, or he sparkles, or both. It's very.
It would not shock me.
It is very displeasing, and this is
Devil May Cry as played by Edward Cullen. But
yeah, and actually this has been out we've known this since Tokyo Game Show from last year when they released a quick trailer of Devil May Cry the reboot. So
I guess if anything, I'm okay with a reboot of Devil May Cry, it just felt like they radically changed who Dante was, and it's disappointing to fans of the franchise.
Looking at this, I'm not quite sure if this is literally, as you guys mentioned this, the first I'd heard about it. So while you guys have been talking, I just was looking it up. Would this even count? It's not a reboot or anything. It's a prequel. It's part of the story. It's not a reboot of the series. It's an origin story for Dante.
Well, so far I haven't seen anything read about. I mean, it was initially announced, and then it's kind of flown a little bit under the radar.
Yeah.
By the gaming media at large, it's been called a reboot of the series.
Capcom even called it a reboot of the series. So
I'm reading a thing here that said that Capcom's interview saying that it's Dante's origin story.
Well, then you could argue the same thing about Tomb Raider.
Touche.
That's it's an origin story instead of a full-on series reboot.
Well, it all depends on whether the new Tomb Raider spawns its own series.
That's also true.
And that the same can go for Devil May Cry.
Twisted Metal is also getting a reboot. The new Mortal Kombat game is considered a reboot because it goes back to 1 essentially, just with
basically it goes through Mortal Kombat 1 through 3 and just kind of retells the stories from that in a certain sense. And actually, I should rephrase that. It adds story to the Mortal Kombat franchise, which was very thinly veiled.
Yeah.
It was just nice to see Mortal Kombat return to its roots. This is kind of like Tomb Raider, where a reboot here is kind of welcomed.
I agree the same way. I feel the same way about Mortal Kombat and Twisted Metal as I do about Tomb Raider. They're all three of them are great series that started off strong. They had some great games and memories for us, and then they lost their way over the years as different designers took over, or they took it in different directions. Now they're going back to the roots, and I can't be happier about it.
Just don't mention to Brian about Freddy Krueger.
Yeah. Oh God. That's a little bit ridiculous even for me. Oh God, and it's not even classic Freddy too. It's reboot Freddy. Oh.
Hey, a reboot character for a reboot franchise. There you go.
God damn it.
But I think most of us can agree that these kind of reboots, the ones where you try to take a series that's lost its way and try to, bring it back to its roots, bring it back to why it was fun in the first place, I think those are welcome.
I agree, and that's why I don't have too much of a problem with these, because they're starting back from square one. They're actually taking the time to develop and work and budget instead of just saying new coat of paint, done. It's the production process is kind of equivalent to making a whole new IP, for example. This isn't just let's slap on some new characters and a couple of additional layouts or endings and that's that. There's a lot of work going into it. So for these. They're taking the story and then making an entirely new game. That's what they're doing. Right.
The advantage here is that a lot of these people that are doing not Devil May Cry, but like Mortal Kombat and the Tomb Raider franchise, these are people who probably grew up playing those games, who love those games, and want to bring them back to the glory days. And Absolutely. They're willing to spend the time and the money and the man hours and probably personal sacrifice as well to make sure that these games are as good, if not better, than the originals when they first came out, because they loved them so much. They want to see these games succeed again.
One thing I really appreciate for the Mortal Kombat one is they brought in the original designer for the first two games, who left in the third one, and this is his first time back in the series since then. But he was really responsible for the first two games, and hopefully his input will help, keep it kind of true to what made it good. I think those are the best ones.
After all we talked through about reboots and talking about, going back to our roots, then in that same light, could we call the upcoming Sonic Generations, which reintroduces the 2D aspect of Sonic, would we be calling that a reboot as well?
Would we call Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 reboots to each other? Because the Sonic series has always kind of done that. Almost every game is unrelated to the last, except for the first ones, the very first ones. Every game made in the last 15 years for Sonic was.
I consider in the case of Final Fantasy, I mean, I always consider each game as a standalone game. So,
and because I agree with you on that, mostly because every time that they make a new Final Fantasy, they basically try and reinvent the wheel. They're not using the same battle system over and over and over again.
Well,
so,
except from,
well, that's in
9,
7.
but...
We should say that's in 7 that they really reuse the same battle system over and over and over.
But, and I mean, there are cases though where reboots, last thing I'll mention, there's some reboots that don't do too well. Silent Hill Shattered Memories is the example I will use.
Terrible game.
It was a Wii game, and it was billed by Capcom as a reimagining of the first game. I haven't made it all the way through it. I might not.
And that's a lot coming from you.
I love Silent Hill, but I think
putting a popular title on a terrible game doesn't make it less of a terrible game.
Yeah, and of course, because it's a Silent Hill game, I had to check it out. And one of the things that was its downfall is that they took something they took a hallmark of the series and removed it. And I say this, and I said this. Hold on, I say this in past episodes where, in one of our episodes when we were talking about what makes a franchise so great and how it, what makes a franchise have staying power is if you keep some of the familiar elements in. For Shattered Memories, they took out combat.
Well, because who needs combat, right?
Every Silent Hill game, you have to fight off these, horrible supernatural things, but you always have some manner of weaponry. In Silent Hill Shattered Memories, if you come in contact with an enemy, your only recourse is to run. What the hell fun in that?
Yeah.
I want the satisfaction of taking a lead pipe and bashing something,
I think their inspiration was all of the old slasher horror movies where you can only run from the villain, but they seem to miss that part where, in most of these movies, towards the end, they bash the thing in the head with a lead pipe. It might not do anything, but at least you try.
Well, they get a gun or a rifle or a shotgun or something. I mean, Jesus Christ. Even in, the Halloween movies, they usually, by, the 3/4 mark of the movie when there's only 3 people alive, one of those 3 probably has a lead pipe or a baseball bat or, if you're lucky, a gun.
It sounds to me a lot like the I'm going through a Call of Cthulhu campaign right now, and yes, even though running might be a proper course of action, you have the option of fighting, no matter how
ludicrous
futile it is, how futile it is. And, at least for Silent Hill, you gotta keep some sort of combat in, even if it might not do a whole lot to whatever abomination you're gonna fight.
That's what they did for Silent Hill 3. They had combat, but you couldn't kill a single enemy. You had to run no matter what, but at least you had the option of shooting the guy in the face and stunning him for a little bit.
So, that I think is an example of a reimagining gone horribly wrong.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, so. Alright. Let's wind down with some final thoughts here. What?
Could I bring up one more thing before we wind down?
Go ahead.
Okay. I know this has not come out yet, but Brian, you and I have talked about this a little bit in a previous podcast. Since it has to do with reboots and everything else, how does everybody feel about them talking about the next Resident Evil game being a reboot of the franchise?
Potentially being a reboot? Oh,
No.
son of a bitch. Oh, son of a bitch.
Since we are talking about reboots. Which do you guys think it falls into? A good reboot, a bad reboot, and how do you feel about that?
I would need to know more information first. I mean, the only games I'm aware of are Mercenaries 3D and Resident Evil Revelations.
Okay.
I've heard of this, of the Resident Evil reboot. It makes sense judging that Resident Evil 5 kind of closed everything up kind of nice and pretty, but I think it's just something we're gonna have to wait and see and find out more as soon as Capcom releases more.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't have really any opinion yet. I would need to know more first.
That's fine. I was just bringing up how you guys were talking about how, some games, they end very well and shouldn't really have a sequel, and that's why I was...
Fair enough. I still don't think it should have a sequel. I think Resident Evil 5 wrapped up the series very nicely.
See, this is just Capcom going, we can't leave a franchise actually end. That'd be the smart thing to do. We have to reboot it and make more money off of it.
Hey, they seem to be just fine leaving Mega Man as is. But I think that was more due to the creator of Mega Man, leaving the company. But that's a different story.
So, as we wind down, and hopefully wind down, I'm looking right at you, Modem. I get the sense that, reboots, remakes, whatever, either can be good or bad, either way. Because obviously we have some strong opinions on this. I'm not a big fan of remakes, but in the sense of, games like Tomb Raider, where they're restarting from the ground up, I have no problem with. So yeah, I mean, I think that, do you think it's good for the industry as a whole?
It can be good for the industry as a whole. It's really, it seems like with anything nowadays, it seems to just be a case-by-case scenario. Absolutely. And we have to look at everything from a neutral perspective, and not how, and understand where, the roots of the game, but then understand if it kind of fell into the crapper, that, it's nice to have a fresh start. Alternatively, if the game, if a series is left on a good note and kind of closed everything up nice, why ruin it with future games?
So, again, it's about the bottom line, essentially. I mean, I know that, for really popular franchises, I could see why they would want to keep them going, but sometimes they really shouldn't. They really shouldn't, so... That's my thoughts on the matter. Kat?
I just think, again, it's a case-by-case scenario. You have to judge it from all sides, look at it from all angles. What is this going to bring to the gaming industry? What is it not? What will it take away?
Fair enough. And Ron?
I think that I agree with the case-by-case basis. I'm more cautionary to it because of the fact that people need to take more risk with IPs and new products, because some of them may just be bad games and some of them may not be that popular, but you could have stuff like Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Like, those are two AAA named games that sell millions of copies that are enjoyed the world over, and those are fairly new to the gaming scene as well. So I think it's that they could use that as an example and be like, what made these games fun and what made them successful, and what can we do to, I don't want to say emulate that, but at least maybe improve upon it. And I think we need to be very cautious with the reboots and the remakes. Otherwise, we're just going to see nothing but another 5 years worth of reboots and remakes, and no other really new games come out of it.
Well, yeah, they'll start doing new things once it hits their bottom line. So,
reboots are nice, but you gotta keep coming out with new stuff. Ultimately.
And so there you go. Pretty much.
Did you skip me?
You've been talking too much.
You don't get an opinion.
No soup for you 1 year. Fine, Ronnie, go ahead.
Well, you said you were going around.
I was.
Okay, I'll keep it quick. As I've made apparent throughout the course of this, I don't see how reboots have really hurt anything. I don't see the number of original games going down, so I see no real negative to any quality reboots that happen or any ports or remakes of old games. It just gets it in front of just gets good games in front of people, and you want to know what? There aren't enough good games out there.
I agree. Although when you re-release a game 400 times, it gets a little old. But that's just me. Downloadable content can be found on Facebook and Twitter. You can find us at facebook.com/downloadablecontent, or also on Twitter at DLContent. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear the feedback. Comments, questions, rants, whatever. We'll read it. We may not reply to it, but we'll read it, at any rate. And so, there you go. So I would like to thank Ron, Ronnie, Nick, and Kat for their wonderful fun on this episode, and we'll see you on the next one. See you around.